to talk about the spark for the viewing deck. Okay. When did the idea for the game first come to you?
So I was in advertising, loving it, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school, no one ever told me that there was a career track where you can be a steward to help brands, global brands, tell their stories to multicultural audiences.
Yes.
Like that wasn't something I knew about. And so when I got into the industry, I loved the idea of working with global brands and helping them shape their stories and translate their stories and so forth. And in doing that work, I got exposed to doing culture transformation work with diversity, equity, and inclusion, running an employee resource group. And for all of the success that I had doing it, we had buy-in from the executives, we had budget. There was still this paradox where we were doing all of these things to support and uplift the idea that as an organization, we believe in our people, but simultaneously sort of creating a culture where individuals were made to feel like they were not included.
Yeah.
And I thought, how could that paradox exist where you can be doing all of these things to uplift, but yet the day-to-day experience of the individuals were just not consistent with that?
Yes.
So I was kind of wrestling with that as an idea. And a friend of mine invited me to an escape room. And I had never been to an escape room. I knew what it was, an experience where you have a certain amount of time to solve some problems with a group. But this escape room was called the privilege of escape.
Oh, privilege. Interesting.
That's what I said.
Huh.
And so I wanted to see what it was about, particularly because it had this sort of sociological kind of angle around privilege and how do you sort of touch on that through an escape room. So I went to the escape room, and when I got there, we broke up into two teams. Each team went into a separate room, and we had 45 minutes to solve puzzles in a room. And after about 43 minutes, and this is 2 minutes left to go, we hear the other team in the other room start celebrating. So we knew that they finished and completed all of their puzzles and they had won. So we had 2 minutes left, and we're like fighting to figure out the problems, and ultimately the doors opened. We didn't solve all the challenges. We get into this one room where there are seats for everyone.
Okay.
And the winning team are already seated. They have chocolates that they've been given, and they're all sort of gloating. And someone comes out and starts to ask us about our experience. And over the course of the conversation, we realize that our room was completely dark while the winner's room was completely lit. They had light, we did not.
Interesting.
And in that moment, we began to question the validity of their win.
That's right.
And our loss. And we started talking about fairness. We started talking about equity. And then the moderator teed up a conversation around what if the stakes were higher than just a set of chocolates that you were offered at the end? What if the stakes were a scholarship? What if the stakes were a loan? What if the stakes were a job application? And in that moment, I sat in the room and I looked around, and this was New York City, a diverse group, women, men. And I saw individuals have aha moments, like light bulbs going around a room, all in 30 minutes. And the key to that unlock was games and play. And I thought to myself, maybe there are another set of tools that can be used to help people recognize and become more self-aware. Because the tools that we had been using were like intellectual tools. It was research and data saying that it's more effective to have this kind of diversity. We were using sometimes moral arguments to say, you know, it is good practice to do this and to do that. But for all of those arguments, it really wasn't changing the hearts and minds of individuals. And so I saw games as a smokescreen, as cloud cover to allow individuals to react, to interrogate their beliefs and values in a way that feels safer and less frothy than intellectualism.
Wow. You talked a little bit about bias hurts. You didn't call it bias hurts, but I know that's what you were referencing. What came first? Was it the game or was it bias hurts? And please talk about what that research was.
Sure. So, you know, I started as an individual who was having a really difficult experience on my team and at the company. I felt like I wasn't being seen. I felt like I wasn't being heard. That is not a unique story.
No, it's not.
I then started to wonder if my story was unique, and it wasn't. And so I started talking to people about their experience as a minority, as an underrepresented individual working in the context of this advertising industry.
Got it.
And I started hearing all of these stories about what it is like to be a woman, what it is like to be a man, what is it like to be sort of dyslexic, what is it like to be queer, what is it like to be an immigrant, what is it like to speak with an accent in a country where having a particular accent had a certain kind of stigma associated with it. And I heard all of these stories, and these were not just stories that were sort of dormant. They affected the way these individuals showed up in their workplaces. And so these were just conversations I was having. And if you remember, I was booking, Monique, can you meet me for coffee for 15 minutes, And it got to the point where I couldn't have these conversations one-on-one with anyone anymore. And so I created a sort of Dropbox. It wasn't called Bias Hurts yet, where I invited individuals to just tell me their stories of bias in the workplace. And the goal was just to understand bias. And, I am a person of color. I'm a Black man living in America. I am not, if I worked in corporate America, coming back to a desk and seeing a noose hanging off of my monitor. That is not the way bias manifests itself in corporate America today. It is a lot more nuanced, a lot more layered and complex.
Yes.
And so I use these stories to understand the dimensionality of bias, to understand the contours. What does it look like for different types of people? What does it look like in different industries? What do people do after they have that experience? And so I then created this global initiative called Bias Hurts, where I began collecting anonymous stories that people have had with bias in the workplace. And then I took all of the insights from those stories to then create workshops that were interventions to prevent those experiences from taking shape.
Yeah.
And so the game was the next step after that. Again, you don't see the product at the first step at all. I had, to be honest, no intention of creating a game. what I wanted to do was I was reading these hundreds of stories and I was like, not only getting chills from them, but I said to myself, how could we share these stories to leaders of organizations and to teams to help them see and understand what the experience of other individuals are like, right? Everything that I'm learning about bias, how can I then sort of teach and to show individuals who are leading teams? And so I started to go around just sharing the data, and it is a strong, challenging data set just to sort of go through all of these stories.
Yes.
For some, it is an indictment on the industries that they're in. Some, it's a referendum on the failings of leadership, which is not what I intended, but it is not an easy thing to sort of read those stories, to feel implicated, and then to not shrink away. So I said, what if I created a game that allowed them to relate to the content in a way that didn't feel so high stakes? And going back to my experience with the escape room, I really leaned on this idea of play. And, you know, play and games are two different things. They're very distinct. And, you know, you can play with a toy, and then playing with a toy evolves into a game.
Okay.
Right? Like if you have a ball that is a toy, but baseball is the game.
Right.
So I didn't just want to create a toy. I didn't want to just create something for people to react to. I wanted to create a game. And what that meant was designing a system of incentives, a system that motivated players to either win or lose, to create a system that inspired individuals to take risks, to consider objectives, to present them with crossroads, to make a choice.
Yeah.
And I took all of those stories and I put together a game that was about playing to learn and not necessarily playing to win. And to add another item on my resume, I became a game designer.
Look at that. Wow.